Hi guys, and welcome back to the 8020 BIM channel. Today we're going to look at how you should bring CAD data into your Revit models. First thing we're going to do is we're going to prepare a CAD file for linking, and then we're going to go through how you should link the file into your respective views and understanding the settings for linking the CAD files. In the next video, we will go into how you can control the CAD layer visibility within Revit itself, so that you can have it present in a certain manner. We'll go through whether you should consider linking your CAD file or importing your CAD file, and in what situations it's appropriate to do both or either. And finally, we'll go through a quick example of how you can create Revit 2D details from existing CAD detail library that you may have. That's a common request that we get, and there is a way to streamline it for future use in future Revit projects. So to begin in this video, yet again, we're going to go through preparing the CAD files for linking, and we're going to go through how the linking process works within Revit. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our AutoCAD environment where we have our drawing that we want to introduce into Revit. So very quickly you can see in this example I have a very bog standard terrace house with a small extension to the rear of it, and this is the file we're going to use as the basis for the example. So the first thing you're going to want to do in any instance is, if you have, for example, multiple XREFs that build up your plan views, you're going to want to go into the XREF dialog by typing in XREF, and you're going to want to select, I don't have any XREFs in this for the example, but you can select the XREFs that you want to be visible in the Revit environment, and you can right click and bind those XREFs to the drawing. So that's the first step. When you open the CAD file, any XREFs that you need, you bind into the drawing. Next, you are going to want to run the purge command. So the idea is that you don't want anything extraneous, layers or objects that aren't being used. So in your command line, you want to type in purge, and here you can essentially just press purge all. You'll get a few kind of warning signs, particularly for the blocks. You can just say basically purge all items and close. And what you'll then see is a lot of the layers, there was many layers from this, but a lot of the layers have been pared back and no longer functional, as well as a lot of kind of blocks that were introduced and then deleted. They've been taken away from the background information. So next, what we're going to want to do is set a command called set by layer. And the idea of set by layer is that any lines that are assigned to a color that differs from the layer that they are on will then convert back to the correct layer color. The reason why this is important is we want the visibility of all our lines to be assigned by the correct layer before we take it into Revit, so that gives us the visibility control of the CAD file within the Revit environment. If all the CAD objects are not assigned correctly to color by layer, then you will not have the ability to manipulate the presentation of those lines in the Revit environment either. So we're going to just use some of this casework for an example. So if we select here, you can see this is under the dialog fixtures and fitting in layers, but on the color at the moment you can see it's set by layer. So we're just going to give this a quick example. We're going to set this to magenta. So everywhere else we have our color by layer, and we want the whole file to be represented like that. So there might be a few instances throughout the file where the color is set directly to a color and not by layer. So what we want to do is type into the command line set by layer, and you can select the objects. Now the great thing is you can literally select the whole file here and press enter. It will say, do you want to change by block to by layer as well? And this is great because it means any blocks that you have brought in will change from the presentation the block is assigned to the presentation of the layer that the block is assigned to. So rather than sometimes you have to go and edit the block to change the line representation within the block, this will override that by layer in the project as well. So that's very useful. So you just select yes in that dialog there. Do you want to include the blocks? Yes. And as you can see, our casework has changed back to color by layer. This is really useful if you're getting CAD data in from external design stakeholders. because you may not be familiar with their layering convention or how they colorize the drawing either. So it just gives you an extra level of control in the Revit environment. The next thing you want to do is essentially go through your layer properties and freeze anything that you know is excessive or superfluous for what you're actually taking across. So for example, I could probably go in here and I can probably freeze these guys here, layer 1 and layer 2. And the great thing, and I've also frozen off the areas. I also do not want to show, let's say, the text elements from the CAD file within the Revit environment itself. So we'll go down and we can turn off. I have various text layers here. So I'm going to turn off all of these. I'm going to freeze all of these essentially. We're going to freeze our dimension as well. We're going to freeze, text. I'm going to go down here and there's another text layer there. So we're going to freeze all of them off. And as you can see, all of our names and stuff have also disappeared here. So after this point, we're going to save a copy of this as it stands. And then what we're going to do is going to break it down into the various views that we want. So I'm just going to go File, Save As, and I'm going to go into our house link files here, and I'm going to say house example complete, and we're going to press save. Okay. So the next thing we want to consider is, okay, in the Revit environment, we are going to set up a ground floor level and a first floor level, and we don't necessarily want the first floor CAD data to be visible on the ground floor and vice versa. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file. Apologies, actually I don't have a template here at the moment, so I'm just going to delete away this data here. And in the new file, we're going to go into copy our ground floor view. Copy to Keyplorer, just Control C. Don't know why that's failing. That's concerning. We'll try our first floor instead. And in the CAD plan that we've just set up, we're going to press Control V, and we're going to be given an insertion point. So if you want to insert it directly to the origin on the CAD file, you can type in 0,0, and that'll snap it to the origin. Now, as you can see, we're actually after getting some of the hatch from the other side of the view as well, and that's not serving our needs. Now, we don't need to turn that off. Actually, we can control the hatch visibility in Revit. We won't want to see our hatches in Revit, but I'm going to show you, because the hatches are placed on the layer miscellaneous, I'm going to control the visibility in the Revit environment in the next video, and show you how to turn off the hatches just by visibility, and that saves you removing the hatches in the CAD file or freezing them out. So in this instance, this is stray, so we're just going to acknowledge that we can change that in the Revit environment afterwards. But what we want is a consistent point in Revit that we know as we proceed up through the floors will remain in the same position. So we're going to look to this front corner of the house here, and what we're going to actually do is select our origin, and we're going to relocate that to snap to the endpoint of that there. And we're going to go to File, Save As, and in our house link files, we're going to save this as first floor. Now, if you give me a moment, I'm going to do the same with the ground floor, and then I'm going to restart the video at a point that we can start introducing these CAD files into the Revit environment. So I'll be back to you in just one moment. Hi guys, so following on from where we left off, as you can see, we have our ground floor and now our first floor plans placed with the origin consistent, and both corners that we know as the building rises up through the levels don't change. Okay, so we're next going to go into our blank Revit file that we have here, and we have two existing levels set up. That's maybe a little bit high, so we're going to save that to 200. So you can see we have our ground floor and our first floor, or our level 1 and level 2, depending on where you are. And what we want to do is we want to bring our CAD files, we want to bring the ground floor into the ground floor level plan only, and we want to bring the first floor into the first floor level plan only, but we want to make sure that they're actually aligned in the vertical plane. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our floor plans and we're going to go into ground floor. And as you can see, we have our ground floor set up to show our project base point. And we also have our survey point. So the survey point is the critical one there, but the project base point is deemed the origin. So it's worth knowing that your origin for your Revit file and your CAD file may not be consistent, and you can control the placement of the CAD file after they've been brought in. If you need to, you can manually change it. It's great when you have a shared coordinate system, but you don't always have a shared coordinate system, particularly on something as basic as a house or kind of like a provisional design scheme or something like that. You may not necessarily have survey data to be working off of, so you can change the location within the Revit environment as well. So on the ground floor here, we're going to go into our Insert tab. And under Insert tab, we're going to select Link. We're going to always try link CAD files where possible. There are a few instances you might prefer to bring in an imported CAD file, but the important distinction between the two is that if you import a CAD file, first of all, it becomes part of the Revit project. It's not just a snapshot of the CAD file within the Revit project. So if you imagine you bring in the file as an import, you will not have any of the changes in the aftermath visible in the Revit environment. So if that CAD file changes, it doesn't matter. You will not see any of the updated. You will remain on the superseded drawing. The important thing with the link CAD is it works similar to an old AutoCAD XREF, whereby every time the project reopens, you will get the most up-to-date version of that drawing will reload as long as it's been as the file path has remained consistent. So link CAD is a great way of staying on top of various revisions of CAD files that may have to be worked upon as the project develops. Import CAD has its uses, but it also adds to the general file size and sometimes even interacts with the geometry, so we only use it in very particular cases. So rule of thumb, when in doubt, link CAD only, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to link CAD under the dialog here, and we're going to navigate to our files. So we're going to go into our house link files, and because we're on the ground floor, we're going to select our ground floor. So there's a few things you need to know about this view. First of all, we only want to see the ground floor CAD data in the ground floor plan in Revit. So we're going to make sure that we select current view only. Had we not selected that, in every view throughout the project, you would see that CAD file once the plane went the depth of the CAD file position. So even in your 3D view, you'd be seeing that CAD file. So we only want it in our current view, so we're making sure current view is selected, okay? So under our colors dialog, we can select black and white if we just want to work on a monochrome. We can invert colors, or in this instance, we're going to preserve, because I want to show you how we can change the presentation in the next drawing, in the next video, sorry, where we can change the presentation of the CAD layers within Revit, without actually having to go back and make any extra alterations to the AutoCAD drawing. In our layers and levels, we're going to select all. We can specify in this instance if we want, or we're going to select all. In our import units, we can select auto detect, but if you want, if you know the units, you can select whatever suits you best here. The majority of the time, auto detect works, so just select auto detect, or you can select millimeter if you know you're working the details in millimeters. Our positioning here is probably the most important part of the dialog, and really it depends on how the CAD data and the Revit data models have been set up to begin with. So you can say auto center to center, whereby if you have a middle of a known view and you have the middle of the CAD view, it will just place the two over each other. If you have something like existing site data, you can set them both up to have shared coordinates, and then you can just select auto by shared coordinates. That is extremely powerful when you have a large development of multiple buildings that you need to set out in site. You can have one CAD plan that's doing all the set out, and then that's driving the basis of the models, so that we can basically just locate the CAD XREFs directly into the Revit environment automatically, and then any alterations to the positions of the buildings can be fed into the various link files and they'll automatically relocate in the Revit file as well. So that's very powerful. But in this instance, because we have a known origin, we're going to select origin to origin. And you'll notice that our origin point for our AutoCAD, our X and Y, will land directly on this point here. So we're going to press open. Now, as you can see, we have our CAD planned. It's after coming into view, and we have. It's quite straightforward, to be honest with you. We have all of our layers have maintained their presentation qualities in Revit. Now, a lot of people, when they're in a hurry, they don't necessarily want to control the visibility by layer. They might right-click, override the graphics by element, and select the projection lines to whatever color they want, and press apply, and then suddenly they have this single color entity that they're using as well. So that's a very, very quick workaround for controlling the presentation, but sometimes you may want to just isolate layers. Sometimes you may just want to work on the wall set out alone and not necessarily have the visibility of everything else. So that's not necessarily the preferred way of controlling the visibility. So we're also going to go to our first floor, and we are going to do the same. So we're going to go into our Link CAD dialog. We're going to select first floor. We're going to make sure current view only is selected. We're going to preserve our colors. Layers and levels, we're going to remain all. We're going to alt text. This you can turn on or off. I typically leave it on unless we're working to a slightly rotated project. So if you have a very, very strange angle, I generally like to turn that off. But if you're working on a square north-south direction, like we are in this one, it doesn't matter. Positioning, we're also going to place as auto origin to origin, and we're going to press open. Now, as you can see, there's something here that's not consistent. I've actually moved the UCS in CAD, but I did not move the origin alongside the UCS. So that was actually an error. We actually need to move the origin alongside the UCS to make sure that in the Revit environment, this corner of the building that we're linking from AutoCAD lands on our origin point, our project base point here locally. But not to worry, we can still resolve this within the Revit space by manually controlling the location as well. So I'm going to go back to the ground floor here, and as you can see, we're not aligning properly. So I'm going to select the ground floor, and I'm going to pick the endpoint, and I'm going to just quite simply move that. I forgot that I'd actually pinned it, and that's actually a really good note to always try pin your CAD data once you've located it, because it is very common that it can accidentally be clicked and dragged off location. So we're going to unpin it. We're going to move the endpoint to our project base point, and then we're going to repin it. So then I cannot accidentally drag that at all. Okay. Now we're going to go to our first floor. And we're going to do another part of the exercise here in terms of locating, let's say, this first floor over our ground floor. So although we know this corner is consistent, we may not necessarily have a consistent corner going up through all the buildings. So there's a great little tool in Revit where you can actually select the underlay. And the underlay itself will present in view. Now, truth be told, I don't know why the underlay is not showing in this instance. So we're going to locate to the no point, but a lot of the time what you'll do is you'll get a little grayed out version of your underlay here, and then you can just align them as you see fit. But as we know the corner here, we're just going to and yet again, I'm being very forgetful. That is pinned automatically on arrival. So we're going to move that to there, and we're going to repin. So now we know that the position of both the ground floor and the first floor are perfectly aligned in the vertical. So just to give you an example of this, we can press our dimension, we can measure this wall, and we can say, okay, well that's 215. So we can select a wall type in our Revit dialog that's 215, so we'll just use this 215 block. We can select wall centerline, and I'm going to set that height just to 6,500 as an example. and we're going to set the base constraint from ground floor. And as you can see, the great thing about linking CAD files into Revit is it actually snaps to the midpoint if you have the correct wall width relative to the wall you're placing it on. So you can build off the center point between two parallel lines, as it's showing there, or you can say wall finish face interior, and you can select the internal walls like that, or you can say similarly exterior, and you can draw on the exterior wall, or you could select the exterior wall as such. And as you can see, I should go into my ground floor plan now, and that's unfortunate. Actually, I forgot to reassign this down to ground floor, so we're going to send that down to ground floor, and you will see that that is actually perfectly in line on both floors. So that concludes the first part of this video. The next part of this video is going to go through how we can control the CAD layer visibility and presentation in Revit itself, and basically how we can control what we see from the CAD data in the Revit environment. Then we're going to quickly talk about in what instance you should consider importing CAD data over linking CAD data, and that will lead us through to creating standard details that you may have from AutoCAD in Revit. And it can be a little bit of a time-consuming exercise in the first instance, but then you have a series of drafting views that you can apply to your project templates or to a standalone project that you can then insert from file, and just have a library that you can draw down from every project going forward in terms of typical 2D details that you may not necessarily be modeling per project. So thanks for tuning in. Make sure to like and comment if you have anything you want to ask on what I've shown above, or if you have any suggestions for new content. And I look forward to having you back for the next video. Thanks a million.